Just want you to know that we're just gonna, no PowerPoint. We're just gonna be really talking and connecting. I think that's kind of the best way to really center our work. Sometimes I get really fixated on a PowerPoint, and so I just thought we would just really talk about kind of our prevention, our pivots. My name is Ann Brandon. If you have not met me, I have two roles, but in this role, I am a consultant and coach for the Ohio Department of Higher Education, and we were able to support campuses this year for prevention, coaching, how we do our pivots, um, and support in that way. We had two different options of packages. One was a fuller package of maybe 5 or 6 meetings to really dig down into strategic planning for prevention. And then we had option two, which were 2 meetings to kind of review folks' prevention plans, maybe add, support or rethink something or how to implement. So we had 2 different packages, and then we have individual technical assistance of an hour if somebody's just like, hey, Ann, I just need to tap into your head just for a second, and then get out very quickly because nobody wants to stay there very long. But no, just getting information about prevention or to review something. So we had a couple different options. Personally, I have been a consultant since 2011. I also was the director of prevention at the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence, which allowed me to be part of the Changing Campus Culture initiative back in 2015. I left the Alliance and opened my own consulting business, actually formalized it, but I'd been doing consulting for quite a while in 2021. And so what has arisen from that is really helping support how we shift and how we deliver and how we think about prevention on our campuses now, especially as we are kind of experiencing a different way of doing that, which means, hey, we know students aren't necessarily attending extra events. How do we do prevention in a way that's impactful with, maybe less resources, or where can we connect to others and connect our efforts? So just a brief overview. This again was a free consulting for campuses. And at the time, I think I had 12 campuses engaged in the work. And I very, very much want to introduce our panelists. We are waiting for one more panelist, Robert Poole from Ashland, but I'm just going to go around and Luan, we can start with you. I want you to just your name, your job title, campus, and generally your campus identity. So we'll start there, and I'll put myself on mute. I think you are muted. I am so very sorry. There you go.
That would be helpful, right? So, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I should say. My name is Luan Flores, and I'm the director at Cleveland State University's Office for Institutional Equity, and also serving as the Title IX coordinator. And we are a 4-year public institution.
Thank you. Go ahead, Bailey.
Hi, my name is Bailey Johnson. I use she, her pronouns. My title at Antioch College is Assistant Director of Strategic Initiatives and Title IX Coordinator, and we are a 4-year private institution.
Thanks. Cleveland State, Antioch, and Ashland were 3 campuses that I was working with, and then I have kind of like as we started coaching, we connected. We connected, but the reality is like 3 folks would be like, let's chat about like the experience about overall our prevention this year. Let's talk about like our aha moments and our challenges and the realities of this past academic year and where we're moving forward, or what we're rethinking to move forward. So I just want folks to know that this isn't going to be like, hey, everything was great this year and these are our perfect outcomes and thank you for joining us. But there are some really good outcomes. So I think the first question I'm going to ask our panelists is, what were the main challenges or barriers your campus experienced this past academic year in terms of prevention programming? And Lawan, we can start with you, and then Bailey will go in that space. And feel free to take as much time as you want.
Okay, thanks. So, I want to start off by saying the reason that I thought it was important to take advantage of the consulting service is that we do have I thought we had a pretty solid strategic plan, but one, it was free, so why not? And two, you never know what you can learn, right? And so we took advantage of the mini session option, and so just really to kind of do a checkpoint, do a check-in, and make sure that are we in line with what other institutions are doing? Are there is there more information that we could gather from this? And so I will say that it was a positive experience. But to answer your question, one of the challenges that we faced at Cleveland State, and I'm sure this is probably similar to a lot of other institutions, is just this was our first full cycle school year coming back from the pandemic. And what we found is that we had a different type of student, right? And so so that was one thing. The students that returned were not the same, right? And so we had to figure out how do we tap into these students. And I say that because before last year we would have a lot of participation. And so the challenge we faced is that we have low participation rates with the programs that we have or trainings and education. And so that was one thing. So we knew that okay, yeah, this was a good plan, but this setup is not working as much. And so we heard that across campus. It wasn't just for our Title IX efforts, but for other programming with campus life and like student affairs and things like that. So that was one challenge or a barrier. And then the other barrier that we faced that I think again is something that we probably have all faced if we've read the Chronicle is we had we had turnover, and we just didn't have as much staffing available. So we were trying to think about how can we still implement all of these things with less people, and the students aren't necessarily showing up. So is it worth our time to even go down that path? And so those are the two largest barriers that we sort of face. And so, while I thought we had a really solid plan, I definitely knew that we needed to do a little bit of tweaking. So those are the two things that I would say kind of made the decision for us to take advantage of the consulting, but also to realizing that things are just different and we got to figure out how to shift.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I just want to say that Cleveland State did actually have a strategic plan and it was published. So that was actually on the website. Like that was the first time, like I always did research and kind of like looked at the spaces of where I was going to be connecting and talking. And so, a public strategic plan laid out. Yeah. So thank you for that. Bailey, go ahead.
Yeah, I would echo what Lavon was saying related to staffing, but not just in terms of quantity of resources. I'm obviously the Title IX coordinator on campus, but we don't have a separate, sort of staff or anything like that for prevention. And on the one hand, yes, doing both of those things can, you can feel very sort of stretched thin, but I actually see that as kind of a positive challenge because I love doing prevention work. It's what sort of brings me hope at the end of the day. But the problem there is not, actually doing both things in that sense. It's, having to transition from being in that Title IX coordinator mode, documenting everything and writing investigation reports to turning around and being the person that, in the room is wanting to talk to everybody about consent. And that can be very uncomfortable. That can be a Title IX coordinator can be a very triggering sort of presence in that space. So I've been trying to get more intentional about that and still find ways that I can participate in prevention work, but also, as we learned in our sessions together, and who else can I bring into the picture to, also just sort of kind of give myself a break from doing that work, just because that can also be really tiring. But then going along with that, knowing that, there can be so much work and, a lot of pressure put on yourself to have, good events and good prevention programming. It can be really discouraging when you organize a big event and you have one or two attendees or nobody even shows up and things like that. So yeah, that's definitely been our biggest challenge at Antioch.
Thanks so much. I just want to let the participants know that if there's something that you're like, yes, 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 that hits with me, if you want to share any experiences as well, this isn't, we'd love the interaction. So if anyone has anything to contribute at any time, please, raise your hand, unmute yourself, put it in the chat. If you're like, yeah, that absolutely hits. I think that was very much across the board is of what folks may be experiencing. Again, if there's somebody who's like, oh my gosh, yes, we had full participation. Yeah, I hear you, Erica. We had full participation, we had big events, people showed up, like we would love to hear if, again, not all year, but like what events hit. So I feel like when I say hit, I meant like, we're well attended and you felt the engagement was, a connection or a skill building or something like that. So please don't feel like this is just our panel. I would love to interject, and there will be some time at the end also to ask questions. I forgot to tell you that, or share some of your stories as well. So yeah, feel free. Okay, so I'm going to move to the next question. So prior to engaging the coaching sessions, and this might be the same type of question, but did you kind of go in with this is what I need the most, right? This is what I need the most regarding my campus prevention efforts. Did you come in the space of these are my priorities? And what were those? So we'll start with Luan again.
Yeah, so I think going into it, I had in my mind that I wanted to do more. I wanted to focus more on some pockets of students that we haven't necessarily specifically targeted, that we know, need more education around Title IX and about like prevention and sexual violence and all of those things. And so for us, so before we had our first session, I kind of written down my notes and said, okay, I want to know more about like how do I provide like trauma informed education and support to these students. And so for us, the students that I was thinking of were our international students. We have a pretty large and we have a growing international student population, and there we've had some interactions with students, and just me understanding that we got to get over the that barrier of like I get that they're here at the institution, but that we have to have like a baseline level of understanding and that they know what these things mean before we can even get to the part about like prevention or any of that stuff. So I was looking for information about that, and then also maybe more information about students who are in the LGBTQ community. And just looking at our survey results, our campus climate survey, I knew that those are two pocketed groups that I wanted to learn more information about how can we focus some prevention efforts for those two groups. So that's what I went into it looking for. However, once we had our session, at least the very first session, and we talked about like prevention versus like education, those things are different, right? And so learning a little bit more about that was, I thought, helpful. But then also, and I hope I'm answering the question because I've veered a little bit,
No,
but
you are.
learning to kind of take a layered approach. So maybe we're not just always focusing on like sexual violence prevention, that maybe we talk about we like interpersonal dialogue or conflict resolution, or how to have difficult conversations, and how all of those things feed into those prevention efforts that may not necessarily be, we would normally call it that it's something that's prevention efforts under the Title IX office, but that if we do some of those things and we can still focus on those groups, but also for the campus community at large, we'd have greater success. So those were the things I thought I would like, that I went into it thinking that I would get something out of it.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, there is no wrong path here. All right. Because, there's a huge difference between all of our like unique campus community identities too, right? So, just the difference between Antioch and Cleveland State, as far as there might be more commuters, it's in more of an urban area, like there's just different needs. So it is very much like there's no wrong way to be thinking about prevention. So I appreciate you connecting those two. Thank you. Okay, so Bailey.
Yeah, so just to mention and reference the prevention package that we chose. So I ended up choosing the larger prevention package, and I'm glad that I did because, I started at Antioch in just October of last year. So only recently started at Antioch. And so I didn't have that sort of reference of knowing that well, in past years, this is what we've done before, or knowing what prevention looked like in past years. I had, no reference of that. And so having that consulting, right up front was amazing. But I think the challenge and where I needed the most support, again, going into staff turnover, is not just the fact that, historically we've had more frequent staff turnover, but then how do you access those resources and that, that kind of thing that were there in the past. It's hard to know when you're coming into a new position like this, what exactly you're inheriting. And it can oftentimes feel like you are starting completely from scratch. And so meeting with you and, the times that we did was really great because first of all, I mean, it was just a really great, kind of like cheerleading session. It always put me in a really fantastic mood. Just knowing that, oftentimes hours of my day are spent documenting, doing investigation. So to just have those like hours of consulting were, it was a huge, just like, I don't know, kind of like cheerful pick me up, but definitely the area that, I felt like I needed the most support in was, sort of around feeling like, it might feel like I'm not, sort of inheriting a whole lot from past institutions, but there are a lot of resources still here. And I think the consulting sessions were really great at helping me figure out how to mobilize existing resources and also tap into resources that getting at what LaJuan was saying, tapping into resources that you wouldn't necessarily associate with prevention work, especially because prevention work is oftentimes so tied to sexual violence. And oftentimes in our prevention and coaching sessions, Anne would just remind me, well, think about the fact that, mental health programming, like that's a form of prevention. Anything that you do with diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's going to be a form of prevention. And it just, I mean, it made things so much more accessible, I feel like.
Hmm. Now, I'll just add to that that you said something really that kind of spoke to me, Bailey, about, most times in our offices, and I don't know if this is true of your office, but we're usually an office of one or maybe two if you're lucky, right? And so unless, you have like most places don't have a full, staff of people, but and so sometimes this work can feel lonely that you're doing the right thing. And so and you're doing the work, but you don't have that like a cheerleader on your side, like saying, "Oh yeah, you're doing the right thing. You're right on track." And so, I think that was probably a very good thing for you that just starting a new position, not having the information. I don't know if it's helpful or not helpful to have had the historical knowledge because then, for me, since I had the historical knowledge, I'm saying, "Oh well, this is how things used to be." And so, if I didn't have that, then I could kind of start from a fresh slate and move forward. So, I guess there's pros and cons to both. But I think anytime, or at least say for myself, anytime I can connect with other people that do this type of work, it's just sort of a confirming feeling like, okay, all right, I'm on the right track. Okay, this feels exactly how other people are feeling, and so that was another, unspoken benefit, I would say.
Awesome. So folks who are on the call, this may feel like the Anne Brandon show, and so I just want to be just realistic and bring you all into the space of there is a dichotomy of being a Title IX coordinator and adjudicating, and then thinking again, being the only person maybe or you're part of compliance, which is a scary thing for folks. When the Title IX person is reaching out, people are like, oh gosh, what did I do? Or like, how do I show up? Or not that y'all are scary, but just you very much tied to compliance and adjudicating. So um that you're not necessarily the messengers for a primary prevention or social marketing. You probably could be, because I think you all have the capacity to do it. But so there's this dichotomy that we talked about of that every prevention space, all the evidence says one person or one office should not be solely responsible for the prevention of harm in multiple sectors. So I just for the folks here who are working in the Title IX realm or working in the prevention realm, I just want to support that kind of like cheerleader thing is that yes, it's part of your job and basically you gotta all of us have multiple jobs now, right? Maybe. So our capacity is smaller, our staff is smaller, we're coming back from COVID. And I just want to reinforce the support of this community level. What we're going to be talking about, our aha moments, is it feels very lonely. You're adjudicating and having secondary trauma from listening to stories. So I just want to acknowledge that. And then you're supposed to go out and do prevention. And yeah, I see a hand. And I just definitely want to speak to that. Erica, I'll just let you pop in and speak right now before I go on. So have at it.
Oh, you didn't have to stop talking. I actually didn't mean to do it, but then now that it was up, I was like, well,
You're
actually.
good. Have at it. All right. There was a reason,
Okay.
right?
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you all so much for this space. So I am a sexual health and violence prevention coordinator at Ohio State for the Student Wellness Center. And so my position is a little bit different. We work very hand in hand with Title X and doing reporting those things. But I'm actually on day 3 of my job. Oh, let me put my hand down because that's weird. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, day 3 of my job, so very much in training mode. But I did have the privilege of, I've been doing sex education for about 20 years, and Ohio State was one of my clients. I worked with a lot of the undergrad, like student groups on campus. They would bring me in to do workshops and stuff beforehand, which is kind of how I got pulled into this position in the first place. And a lot of the workshops that I did focused on pleasure as a form of prevention. I don't know if any of you have thought about that or have feelings about that or have any experience with that, but in my experiences with the student groups, and it's very small. I mean, Ohio State is 64,000 people. So please know I have not in any way, shape, or form reached anywhere near that many students on campus as one solo person. Who is
On
not
day
a part of a
3, I
team
would
at the
expect
beginning.
not. So
Yeah,
but
right.
you never know what the expectations are. Sorry.
Yeah, right. But those programs that I was able to facilitate were very well attended. People were really interested in the topic, and nobody really felt the pressure of like prevention, you know what I mean, and those conversations. And it kind of opened up the space to have a conversation more about like cultural influences and like based on like where you came from, where you grew up, what your family kind of passed on to you about your body and about your relationships and what was healthy and what wasn't, what you were modeled, what you were shown growing up, and all those things. And it kind of was able to do like a multi level kind of approach to it. And at the end it was like, so if we're all talking about all of these things all of the time, how do we think that will impact this and this? And so how is it a form of prevention? And it was really great to see them like kind of connect those dots for themselves just based on the conversations of talking around it for an entire hour. And then that last part was just them connecting dots. So I didn't know if anybody had done anything like that or if you had any thoughts on that. I'm kind of thinking about doing similar programming in this position with more of the student groups, and then of course expanding on so many other topics. But it was a very successful one in the past.
Erica, thank you so much for adding to this, because I think that kind of like what we're talking about is, yes, one, capacity, and what expertise can we bring in? So, anything that you could share being like, hey, this is how we promoted it. This is how we like went about our conversations. And if that feels okay to you, of course, I know people may not be wanting to share curriculum but I think that that approach that you are talking about is really important. And then I'm going to put on a different hat right now. I'm also the associate director of Ohio University, and I'm here in this space of the capacity of a consultant coach. But our largest like attended event was about sexual health. And it's kind of like there is a gap of, not maybe having the education or the experience and background prevention in high school, like middle school, high school, that there is a knowledge, there's a need for knowledge, and there's like we had high attendance. So I don't want to say thirst because that sounds weird, but
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I think
yeah.
for me, what I've experienced is that most of the sex education is fear based, and it's like abstinence
Yeah.
only. So there's
Yep.
no prevention because nobody's getting any information about how to actually keep themselves healthy through like testing or barrier methods
Yep.
or any safe sex methods at all. They're not even talking about it in general. So then they get to college and they're like, wait, what's happening? Or they've already experienced a bunch of stuff in high school and they've either got trauma associated with that or, you know, there's a million things that could be going on, right? And so I
Yep.
think part of it is a lot of them are coming to college without the knowledge and then they
Yep.
get access to it and they're like, oh, wow. And so then they're like really heavily attended programs when you're talking about things like that. But then even given that, some from what I understand, there's still a lot of stuff that isn't attended here on campus either, just because of capacity or students not wanting to do, they're exhausted after class. And so they don't want to stay on campus and go to another program. Or it's just, you know, it's hard to get the word out to so many students sometimes. And, you know, just kind of like facing all those barriers that you all have mentioned already. And some, you know, students live off campus or whatever the case may be. So a lot of times from, again, day 3. So, but from what I understand is there's a lot of connection with the student groups that are already registered with the campus officially. And so when it comes to marketing, we just kind of rely on them to pass it out to their people because more of the undergrads are looking at their social media or getting their communication versus us pushing it out our way. And so kind of like tag teaming with them to get the message out has kind of been the benefit, I think. And then with me, before I came here as a consultant, I definitely relied on the groups to pass the message. I mean, I posted it on my social media too, but my audience and followers were all over the place. They weren't all here, and they're also not Ohio State you know, like students or anything like that either. So it was more like, hey, this is what I'm doing versus like, come join us here, you know, which is what the student group could do in comparison to me. And then once my face showed up on one flyer and then it's showing up on multiple other flyers, then they're like, oh, that's the girl that came during, because we have like a sex week at OSU too, where it's a whole week of just sex education and sexual wellness and all that type of stuff. And so that's been going on for, I think, maybe going on 5 years. And I was as a consultant, my consultant hat, I was a part of helping them build that up. And so then people got used to seeing my face. So if they saw my face on the flyer, then they would come because they had been to a previous, you know, workshop. And so stuff like that. And so I think it's, you know, relationship building. I think it's, you know, making sure that you're being seen in spaces maybe outside of where you would normally be seen, like kind of building that rapport. So I know now in this position, I've got connections to undergrad students already just based on the work I've been doing the last few years. I'm kind of planning on tapping into that to help get connected to other student groups and kind of figuring out like, okay, who's been to one of my workshops before? Because I'm basically just doing the same thing, but for Ohio State now instead of for myself, right? So the relationship building was a big part of it.
Yep. Everybody's gonna be like, Erica, can you come to our campus too? Right. And that's the thing is
That's a sidebar conversation.
right. No,
Just
no.
kidding.
And that's the thing is this like this community level grassroots organization is basically what you're using
Mhm.
in the space. Of course, you know, Ohio State, we think about different resources, but
Of course.
folks who are listening, when we're going to be talking about some of this community level like work too, and where our campus is somewhat landed is if you are the lone person, if you are the person adjudicating Title IX, because Erica, it looks like sounds like you have a different space. You're good. We have to rely on our partners and our community partners because it's just not doable to even add something maybe to your plate. Because again, Bailey, I know you like prevention. I know you all like prevention, but it's kind of like, but I'm also like my focus is like I have to adjudicate, I have to do Title IX. Like I have to do these types of things and these are the priorities. So what Erica is stating and how that organic process of connecting and networking is really the importance of this kind of like this community approach. So Erica, thank you so much. And I do think that sexual health, talking about like sexual health being part of well-being, because we're about to tap into that too, right? sexual health is part of your overall well-being. And then that's kind of the end. Because if we're labeling our events like come to the sexual assault prevention program, like nobody's going to do that. Right. Like I don't want to do that. And I've been in, and I don't mean any like I don't want to disavow people who've, been harmed or harmed. I'm just saying like I don't want to come to something like that. And so, how we communicate message and plan our events too is really important. Thank you. So I'm gonna roll back to, because that's really, really important about our shifting. Lawan, I'm gonna ask you this question, and then anyone else feel free to pop in. When we were like, even throughout this year, so I'm specifically talking about coaching or the consulting space. And you both tapped into a little bit about kind of how you shifted, and that's really important. Um, what shifted? Like, what was the biggest shift, or what aha moments did you have that kind of moved you into like, hey, this is like how we're going to be planning our prevention efforts? Like, what was the kind of shifts or aha moments that you had? And I'll be quiet and let Lawan go.
Well, first, welcome Erica to our space, to this space. I shouldn't say our space, but welcome to this space. And we wish you well on day 3. And so to answer the question, let's see, the aha moment I had was when when you talked about tying our prevention efforts to mental health or mental wellness efforts. Right, yeah, mental health and wellness efforts. And so I thought, boy, what a very simple concept, and why didn't I think of that? And it was very timely for my institution because we've just shifted and sort of changed direction and talking more, our president's talking more about mental wellness, and our tagline is like be well, and we're focusing more on that. And so when you made the sort of the connection between, if you are in a space where you feel violated or you feel harassed or you feel any of these things, then you can't be well. And so that's exactly what we've been saying for our tagline for the institution overall. So it was a very simple thing that I don't know why I didn't think of it, but so that was my aha moment. And so then I took that a little bit further and thought about, okay, well, what ways can we tie, thinking about who are our other campus partners like health and wellness. We do have peer educators here. And so that was the aha, but then taking it further was, I know that some institutions I've talked to some, colleagues at Ohio institutions, that there's a mental health fee attached to some of the schools. And so I started to look into that to see, okay, well, maybe this is something that we could implement, because the other challenge or barrier that I didn't talk about is obviously the funding, right? Do we have the money to do all these things? And so tying that to the mental health fee in some way to pull some of those resources was the aha. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe we could get some interns, and I got my wheels spinning. So that was my aha moment.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks talking, and Bailey, I'm just gonna move to you. I don't want to steal your thunder either. But there's a lot of money, there's a lot of support, and as there should be, decreasing in depression and anxiety and folks dropping out of college and retention and all of that. So yeah, I'm going to move to Bailey, and then anyone else who'd like to share any feedback or thoughts if you've connected your work into the well-being. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I wanted to answer this question overall and then tap into something that Erica was referring to earlier as far as, sex and sexual health and well-being. I think overall shifts in planning was certainly just widening planning efforts to include a number of different folks on campus. And I think it had so many benefits. And not just including them in the work, but making them feel like they were being included in the work. And that was like a benefit to doing that I didn't even think about. Sometimes it's more, sometimes you just naturally kind of think like, well, I need this person to be, plugged into this work, like I need their expertise, et cetera. But then when you can also make them feel valued and empower them to know that they're engaging in prevention work too, that is a whole other goal that, I just didn't even think of until doing some of these consulting sessions. And it does help. It certainly helps with having more, reasonable expectations about, what it is that I can and cannot do. I think it's become more of a habit of self-care too, just to be able to mobilize some of these resources. And it's just been really helpful to understand that I really don't need to be an expert in prevention to be doing this work. I know before I came here to Antioch, I was, a grad student, and this was, sort of my first like big job out of college. And when I was a grad student, I was working in sort of the anti-human trafficking advocacy and things like that. And I got exposed to the field of sexual violence prevention. But I think sometimes what happens, even when you have opportunities like that to, learn a lot about it, is it just exposes you more and more to how much you don't know about an area or a specific field. And on the one hand, that's great because it can make you feel like, oh, there's so much for me to learn, and it, it really sort of humbles you, but it can also, really overwhelm you. And so when I came to this position, having just got out of grad school and, knowing how much I didn't know about prevention already, in my mind, I was telling myself like, I have to transform myself into kind of like a mini expert of prevention. Like I need to know exactly what all these different models of prevention mean and know exactly how to implement them. And that's always helpful. And, it's great when you can figure out how to use those tools. But it's so much more sustainable to be able to know, yes, you can do that, but you can also mobilize resources that, already have that for you. But then getting more, I think, into a specific I think this whole session was about prevention pivots, right? So thinking about that playing out on Antioch's campus and Erica's earlier question about pleasure as prevention, I really loved thinking about that. Again, that tagline, just pleasure as prevention. I thought that was brilliant. And one of the things that I've noticed on Antioch's campus is like the one thing that we do really have going for us is like we have a very sex positive campus culture that is extremely like led by the students, which is wonderful. We have we have a month of sex that is specifically led by students on campus. And I think that, there's so many good things about that work. I think there can be good and bad things to the fact that that work is entirely separate from, from Title IX and prevention work that I do, right? So on the one hand, like it's a really good thing that the students feel very empowered to do that. And I, want them to continue doing that work forever and ever. Sometimes I think where it can hurt is it can take out the education part of the sex education. And so it's very much kind of like a sex positivity free for all, but almost like we've swung the pendulum completely in the other direction. And I'm like, I'm still very much like, that's great. I want to keep doing this stuff. But I do want to focus my efforts in the future on more intentionality around sex positivity and sex education. So again, going back to that tagline of pleasure as prevention, I think that is exactly the right way to plug sex positivity into prevention work. And so that was just, that was a really nice way for me to think about what we'll be working on in the future. So yeah, thank you for that point earlier, Erica.
Yeah.
And if I'm sorry, I don't mean to jump in, but if I can, I actually think that tagline works for anything, right? Like it happened to be sex education, but like pleasure as prevention will work good for mental health or for just health in general, or, for pleasure being talking about like just taking your own pleasure back. Like, what do you enjoy doing? Do you enjoy going and getting ice cream? Do you enjoy watching TV? Do you enjoy watching, like, those are things that are good for your mental health, for your overall well-being, for like your ability to like free your mind for a second and then come back and do whatever schoolwork you need to do. Like, there's a lot of things that tagline can work for. I mean, of course, it was talking about sexual pleasure in my instance, but as you were talking, I was thinking about all the different ways that like that could even work across, topics too. So I don't know, just a thought. But thank y'all for your feedback.
That's really great. I like joy as prevention. I just like that popped in my head too. Joy as prevention, right? And everyone, just as a sidebar, I think, some of the insights that I got from folks were what we think prevention is and what prevention actually is too. So with the other coaching things, like we very much, because we don't have the capacity maybe to dig deeper into what primary prevention is and what like this community level is. Basically, you want to change like the norms of around violence, around use and alcohol, around misogyny, around racism. Like all of these things are actually connected. And so folks on the call, just on the webinar, not the call, think of this as, who do we need to connect to and help in spreading a message of positive pro-social prevention, which is different than don't harm people, don't be a perpetrator, this is the policy, this is the law, this is the classical criminal definition of sexual assault. Like we have to think of doing things different because those don't necessarily change attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. But connecting to your community is a protective factor. So when you have a sense of belonging and you feel connected, engaged on your campus, and that could just be one mentor or one adult or one person, that's actually prevention. So as we think about this, that sounds like, whoa, and whoa, that's way outside my purview. That is why we need the help of partners. We need well-being folks. We need like thinking about exercise as medicine, that we need our community partners for like unique students who are commuters. How do we reach different folks is going to be based on your campus like identity, but also who you're in community with and who you're in partnership with. And goes back to the one person, one department cannot do it all. And well-trained peers, right? So thinking about that, not just having them regurgitate an adult presentation, because the adult presentation is, this is what sexual violence is, or this is what dating violence is, and this is what, to not do, and this is what not to say. What about like, these are the healthy aspects of relationships, and what if we have a contest on like, so thinking of this, I sounds like I'm being very preachy, but I think we have to think of things that are shifting from our normal programming, training, in-person attendance, and putting a lot of time and resources. Those are important. It is in-person connection, but how can we do that in a way that has an impact on the student and our student body and our student groups? And are we taking the right time and resources and capacity and using it wisely, because we don't have as much? So that's kind of like the thing. What actually is prevention? Well-being is prevention. Positive sexual health is prevention. Trauma-informed care is prevention. Self-care is prevention. A lot of our coaching sessions were not just driven into doing the work. It was about self-care. What can you say no to? And I'm gonna tell you something. I have 21 years of primary prevention experience and research and climate surveys. And I came into spaces and I'm like, hey, we're not gonna do that anymore. And people flip out. So I want you to know, saying no is brave. People absolutely lose their minds because that means they may need to show up in a different way because you did the same thing over and over. Now, yes, I do know we need to do Title IX. Yes, I do know we need to do policy. Yes, there are compliance pieces, but saying no is actually an act of self-care. And you're like, and I might lose my job if I say no to things. But like, that's where we sit down and coached and prioritize. And is this even evidence-based? Is this following a model of primary prevention? Is this having the impact, and are we measuring it? So there is evidence behind smaller prevention, like groups, smaller discussions, rather than a one size fits all to a bunch of people who you're just kind of checking a box. And so I want to say, like, in this space, that those shifts, those pivots are essential to your own like management of your of your job, what you have to do, your priorities. And it's sometimes hard to say no. So if anybody wanted to speak to that, we can open it up. I have two more questions here, and then I kind of want to open it up to conversations or like spaces for like Bailey, Lawan, anyone like to answer some of the questions about, your experience in the academic year. I might go ahead and just ask the next question because I think this is really important. I think let me do that. Let me ask a question, then eventually we're going to open it up. Okay, so the next question is, what goals did you shape related to your prevention efforts? So again, this isn't like what we've completed, what we've done. This is just like, from the coaching sessions, what was shaped? And then we can talk about like some of those outcomes, some of the things that, maybe we've able to do. But like, what goals did you generally shape? And then we can start with Lawan and then.
So we're still a work in progress, but I'll say that some of the goals that we kind of set out were to increase our social media presence. We didn't have a social media presence. Like we would send information to different departments. I like the idea of sending information to the student groups because that's where you probably get more views. So that's one area that we would like to focus on. The other one was to reconvene. We had a committee going, but because of the turnover, we hadn't really convened as a group since we've been back. So to reconvene a committee to talk about our strategic plan and our prevention efforts for the upcoming school year, and then also to identify new campus partners, and both on campus and off campus. We were seeking out some of the other, like the rape crisis centers that are in the local area. That was something that we had before that we haven't had in a couple years. And so I think that was really helpful and impactful for our students. And so that's one of the goals, is to re-engage with an external partner. And then the other one was to think about ways that we could better utilize our peer educators. And certainly to your point about the peer educators, not just kind of regurgitating what the adult conversation would be, but to put something together that the students would understand from a peer, and that's going to be a little bit different. So to utilize those peer educators. So those are the, I guess, 4 things that we said we would incorporate those into our goals for the next year.
Awesome, thank you. Go ahead, Bailey.
Yeah, so I had one, sort of overarching goal or final product that I was working towards while utilizing the consulting sessions. And so, of course, again, I got to Antioch in October, and these consulting sessions almost started, right away after that. And so this was my first like big, project, in my job too, was to organize a prevention retreat. And so we invited a few different folks on campus to attend the retreat. We ended up focusing more on faculty and staff attendance, but we did have one student attend the prevention retreat as well. And so, yeah, I specifically utilized the majority of consulting sessions to really focus on and plan that. And it was great. We got to have Anne come actually and be a part of the retreat. And in addition to having Anne as a guest speaker and present on prevention, we also had Sharon Wasco come, who's the consultant with the Taking Bold Action program. And she presented on our institutional data as well. And so it was a really great day. We had, lunch catered in, and, spent the first part of the day. We held kind of like a dialogue session between all of the folks there at the very beginning. I wanted to focus on, especially at that beginning part of the day, making sure that folks were connecting with one another, like as prevention advocates, and that they understood that they were actually prevention advocates and that what they were doing is prevention. We had these sessions specifically with Anne and Sharon where, everybody got to kind of sit back and, just learn for a little bit. And then for the final part of the day, we spent a lot of it in dialogue, just sort of recapping what we learned, but also you know, really trying to focus on existing campus efforts, because my other goal of that day was not to make it a day where, again, we're completely reinventing the wheel and sort of starting over, so to speak, but that we were you know, connecting with existing work that is going on campus, including some of our, for example, like co-curricular planning efforts, updates to our policy and things like that. So yeah, and so it was really great to have Anne and Sharon be there as guest speakers, but also the entire event was funded through our participation in the Taking Bold Action program. So it was really great to, you know, have all of those sort of combined, like, you know, we got the funding, and we had Anne there and we had Sharon there. It was a really great, you know, sort of product of all of the, I think, different resources that there is within the Ohio Department of Education. And so just to be able to like gather those together and utilize those all at the same time was wonderful. And again, it was just sort of a reminder of the focus on, you know, mobilizing different resources, and how, again, you know, that can make things more sustainable. But then also we ended up having this, you know, great sort of product come out of it. And I've, you know, heard really positive feedback from folks that attended. And I think everyone who attended, you know, they're all focused on campus, that I think, you know, very much understood that their role was not to come to the retreat and then leave and not do anything with that. But I genuinely think that they got a lot out of it that they're going to, you know, sort of take back to their respective spaces. So yeah, that's what we were working on.
Thanks, Bailey. And Luan, also just knowing that we're not going to be able to have everything completed, or like even just our connections made, right? But that is an important thing, is what if it's a prevention? And I know that everyone's like, oh gosh, if we call something else like a committee or a task force, people are going to revolt. So please know, you know, like maybe it's a work group, but like there's, you know, basically when we think about it, a lot of our time and efforts did need to be to do, you know, in the realm of response, right? So we need to make sure that we've got care for survivors, and a process and training and all of those things. So knowing that after someone's been harmed, and our resources and following federal and state regulations are important, but we don't necessarily have the same type of resources. So you may have a SART, or you may have a group that works together to kind of have conversations about cases and what's going on on our campuses, but we don't do that same thing in the realm of prevention for lots of things. So I mean, not just sexual violence, but what are we doing for alcohol and other drug? What are you doing for well-being? Is there a well-being task force? And so one of the outcomes of some of the coaching sessions, and where like Bailey was kind of talking, is if you reinvigorate prevention and you possibly connect it to well-being, knowing that, like, hey, again, like we said, people who are being harmed on campus aren't well, and people who are harming people on campus aren't well. So I mean, think about that, right? So, well, you know, just thinking about like, what if we had a safety and well-being task force, right? So, or safety, well-being, and prevention, not task force. Again, take the task force part off of it. But what, you know, that will help maybe bring people into the space of owning pieces of campus well-being, and campus well-being is reducing harm. And so that's where that in is. And so I did have a couple, I think Robert Poole from Ashland, who wasn't able to join us, is, you know, they created a safety and well-being like prevention work group. And so it reinvigorates, right? Right. Yeah. Coalition might work too, Erica. So just thinking of, you know, where, you know, how would that run, and just setting that up could have been an outcome too. And I just want to talk about the retreat also with Bailey, is, you know, Antioch's president was there. The, you know, dean of students was there. There were, you know, housing and res life director, staff and faculty were there. And again, there is a culture of this togetherness and willingness to lead efforts regarding, you know, sexual violence on Antioch's campus. So there's already kind of that culture. Is there a readiness that needs to be done? But it starts maybe with the well-being and prevention coalition, right? So getting in, one, you're going to be able to tap into maybe some resources and money. So let's be real there, okay? Because if you say, hey, let's join, and again, I'm not degrading, I've been in the field for 20 years. Let's join the sexual violence task force or sexual assault response team. Like, yeah, we know that we need to do that. That is something we have to have in place. But, really just language matters. So we want to work in a pro-social, positive messaging, strength-based prevention way. What does that look like, right? And so again, having alcohol and drug folks there, folks who are leading those efforts or even responding, having well-being folks there, having counseling there, having like, hey, what could we align our messaging? So I want to say that, just bringing what Bailey did, that Bailey also did a grounding and connecting exercise where everybody just kind of like went into a space of, we're just really here to like, what excites us about prevention, and just asked like 5 questions and went around to everyone in the room. And it really just brought it into a space of, we care about our students. We're going to reinvigorate. This is a new kind of like charge, what leaderships can help us with this charge, right? All of these things that we can do, but it's really important that you feel that you're supported in doing this, because what you're going to do is you're going to have people take pieces of prevention and help you plan them. So as you think about this, it's a re-energizing space. Again, you're like, hey, I'm just Title IX. I'm just trying to breathe here. Like the semester's over and like, what? So I want to acknowledge that, but I also like, this is how we're going to move into that community level prevention. We're just going to be like, hey, we care about our campus. We should take care of each other. Violence prevention, anti-racism, reducing harm for alcohol, drugs is part of well-being. Hi, Robert made it. I was just talking about you. Your ears must have been burning. But really, again, thinking about well-being holistically should, encapsulate your prevention efforts in multiple areas, and sexual harassment and sexual misconduct and dating violence and stalking. But if you're just gonna be like focusing on that, we'll never do the work. And so this is part of an evidence-based approach too. So Robert, how are you? I am so happy to see you. We got time, so please, no worries. If you want to introduce yourself, and we'll kind of go from there. I think we're going to maybe talk about, just real quickly, you could talk about your coaching experience, what you learned, but just introduce yourself first. So we'll start there.
Well, thank you. I love you guys. Thank you so much for your patience, and I'm so sorry I was late getting on. But we had an amazing several sessions with Ann Brandon. So thank you, Ann, for the time you gave, the wisdom, the insight, the critiques. It was very helpful. The whole ball of wax. I fully recommend Ann and her services. So I'm Rob Poole. I serve as the Vice President for Student Affairs and Title IX Coordinator. So we've been able, through these past few weeks, couple of months after our time with Ann, to restructure our entire Title IX committee. We have a cross section of representatives from faculty, staff, students, and our off-campus safe haven advocacy program, to move and pivot from mostly a response and awareness program to a prevention and response. So every one of our committee members, we've got about 20, chose their preferences. So they chose if they wanted to be on a prevention team or response and awareness. And of course, there's overlap in that Venn diagram. And I've been at Ashland University for about 5 years in July. And wow, what an amazing trip it's been, I'm sure, for all of us through the pandemic, as well as we're waiting on the new regulations from the DOE, new, renewed, recycled, reformed. We're all very excited for that. So again, thank you very much for having me on and for your patience.
No problem. Thanks for joining us. We're just going to open it up. Maybe if there are any participants who kind of want to like chat with the panelists, or even just like connect on any issue that we talked about, I'm just going to open it up for any questions for our panelists, just about prevention in general. Would anyone like to share about their prevention or efforts or your academic year? Feel free. Feel free.
I can go. I think one of the ideas that came out of the prevention retreat actually that we did is the need for more intentional dialogue. And it's funny because there was a student there who was just, very plugged into everything and had a lot of great ideas. And proposed the idea of having more intentional dialogue is almost kind of a kind of consciousness raising, which of course I love very much. So a second wave feminist kind of concept, but I would love to bring that more so back to campus. And it made me happy to know that the dean of students was also at that prevention retreat. And we had our staff meeting this morning, and we hadn't really had the chance to recap the retreat yet or anything like that. But she had said, I wanted to talk to you about, some things that we need to focus on, next year for student affairs and some programming and some things like that. There have been like a number of issues that, have come up on campus as far as, we need to spend some more time really sitting down and talking about some of this stuff. And some of it had to do, directly with sexual violence and things like consent and policy and things like that. But also we definitely learned a lot at the retreat about some things that we need to be focusing on for our institution specifically. And just to give one example, one thing that we learned from the data that specifically that Sharon Wasco presented on is that, there are, a lot of positives about belonging, on campus at Antioch. But one of the things that, really stuck with me is that there is a pretty big lack of institutional trust here. And that has definitely been just kind of a part of our history. And it's funny because some ways I think of that as kind of a positive thing. Like I came here to Antioch's campus knowing that students are, oftentimes like very, empowered to call out harm, to advocate for changes in policy. But at the same time, like you need to balance that with the fact that, we do need a certain level of institutional trust. And so, everybody at the retreat was all very aware that, this is something that we need to talk about and like, what do we actually even do about it? And just to hear from Sharon and Ann, look, there's a way that you can go about approaching this, telling the students, look, we have this data, we hear you, we hear that that there is a lack of institutional trust. We need to get these students basically all back in a room and have a very open conversation with them about, kind of like help us help you. And so I'm very, very excited to do that. That's just one example of like one possible dialogue I think we want, because I think we really want to have a whole series. But I think what made me happy about like having those conversations today is I realized that the dean of students came to me with that idea. And we were very much both so like on the same page about things. Whereas, for example, planning the retreat was great because I got to mobilize all these different resources, but it was still very much something that I did as kind of like a one-person show. Whereas, we had this retreat and now like I had people coming to me with their ideas and I can make, help their ideas, come to life instead of, it just all coming out of this office. So yeah, that was a really great, great product that we got out of the retreat that we can, focus on for continued efforts.
Bailey, I just want to thank you for sharing that, because you're taking your data and you're using it to act on it, right? So like we have that in our institutional data, using the climate surveys. We're like, oh gosh. So one, thank you for sharing that, that authentic feedback. And that's really important. So thank you. I just want to say thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Any prevention challenges, barriers, successes just from this year to help us kind of like share out how we can look at next year?
So I'll add one of the successes that we had. So in addition to I say our normally scheduled programs, for like Sexual Assault Awareness Month and things like that. One program that was really very successful, and in fact we did this we offered this before connecting with you about like connecting all these pieces and parts, and so it was sort of just because of what was happening on our campus surrounding like some free speech issues and other things that weren't 100% connected to the Title IX piece, but we're the Office for Institutional Equity, and so we deal with harassment and discrimination as well. So Title VII and Title VI, and so that's where this idea came from. But we hosted of 4 sessions of it was we call it's not we'll call it a training on intergroup dialogue and how to have difficult conversations, how to navigate through difficult conversations, and how to call out, things that you see that you believe to be wrong right on our campus. And so the initial focus was going to be we invited the student leaders for all the student organizations. And to our surprise, even though we hadn't had the attendance have been like it fluctuates, but for this particular subject, we ended up opening additional sessions because we had so many students to participate. And so we opened it up to the student leaders and then also to our peer educator groups. And so the plan, since it was so successful, that what we found out for us, there had been some incidents on campus dealing with like protesters and things like that. And so it started the discussion about like how to combat that, how to speak out, how to advocate. So if you see something, say something, but what does that mean? How do you effectively impact change on your campus? And so um, we're going to host a train the trainer. So those students who attended, we're going to continue to have those intergroup dialogues so that they could watch us do it and then offer a train the trainer so that they can take that back to their student organizations. But I think it's part of that layered approach that you talked about, that we're not just specifically saying like this is something like you shouldn't do this, or this is wrong, or this is like sexual violence and you shouldn't do it. This is the ways, like just other places where we have empowered students to sort of stand up in different areas. And I think that that would be something that they could use not just for our area, but for, different places on campus and once they leave the campus. So that was really successful. The other thing we did was we host a series called Courageous Conversations, which is an online, platform where there's usually a moderator and then guest panelists talking about specific things. And so the one that we have coming up is focusing on like normalizing conversations around mental health and mental wellness and well-being. And so that's one of the other things that we have coming up, that actually we have people that have signed up to participate. And so those have been really successful, and sort of thinking about ways to make that pivot from maybe we don't need to always have an in-person program, but our people, for us, we have a large commuter campus. And so people may not want to stay late after class to come to a program, or they may not want to come in early, or they can't come in early, because we have a commuter campus, and also the average age is probably around 26 or 27 years old. So we want to think about ways to engage people that fall outside of that traditional category for students. And so those have been really successful, and so people log in and they chime in. And so those are two of the prevention efforts that we added that we didn't have in the past, and so they've been pretty successful.
And would you have thought of that as prevention?
Not until talking to you, Ann, actually, no. How it happened is the other investigator in my office had that skill set, and she was new and said, "Hey, I think this would be really helpful because we get students, mostly students coming in to complain about things, but they don't know the proper ways to complain, or they don't know how to properly advocate to be, effective." And so, storming up to my office's house where the president's office is, so storming up to the university president's office and demanding something happen isn't quite going to be the way to get things change. But what are some ways that you can speak out when you see something that's wrong, that will be effective? And so that's where that came from. And so, I guess the other lesson in this is tapping into the resources that you do have available, because I had not known that she had that experience, and it kind of came out, and I'm like, well, what else can you do? So started to fall under that other duties as assigned, but it was successful. So yeah.
That's awesome. When we think about, so you've been, they've infused bystander intervention, and anti-oppression, thinking about the folks who may harm people, who may, use racist tropes, also may delve into misogyny. Like there's risk and protective factors of people who may harm. So, again, reporting and compliance, I don't know what the stretch is there, but that is prevention. So thank you for adding that. Anyone else want to check in, talk about prevention successes, barriers, anything else in their prevention realm?
I just have one question for everybody. Is if anybody has any experience with like pre-recorded programming or webinars that students can attend, I'd like to get your experience with that. I don't know if any of you have tried some of that stuff, but I know for us, sometimes the participation can be better because then students can watch it when they actually have time, and then we're just seeing more, in the past, at least there's been more engagement on the back end of like seeing the numbers of people that are watching it versus how many would attend in person. And so I don't know if you all had experience with that in this particular prevention space and how that kind of worked out for you.
Eric, I'll just share that we started video recording our face-to-face programming. And what we found is that it gets better engagement from students when they can see their own student peers who are there in the room or asking questions than it would be a $5,000, subscription. Those are great. There's nothing wrong with those programs, but knowing these are your peers, that the faculty that you'll see in your classrooms or staff who work with you, advisors and so forth, that tended to get better participation rates for us. And I'll just share a couple other things we've done since I was grossly late getting on. I apologize again for that. The prevention efforts that we've been working on that I think have had the most impact are combining activities to help fulfill needs of students and giving them information about prevention. So for example, we had a self-defense class, which probably many of you have had or are still hosting. And then in the midst of that self-defense, we couch it not just in any aggressive situation, but in a sexually aggressive situation. Sounds obvious, but you're learning self-defense techniques, being aware of your surroundings. So self-defense 101 is being around your surroundings as you're walking anytime throughout the day. A lot of people are vigilant when they're walking at night, but we know that most stalking happens during the day, statistically on college campuses. It's not after the sun goes down. And so oftentimes students aren't even aware. So when we layer that in, I'm not the instructor, so I'm going off of what I've heard through other students who've attended, all the way up to grappling techniques. So it's the self-defense is structured to help in any context, but when they're doing these techniques, they talk about it in the context of specifically sexual violence or violations. They can protect themselves well.
I think when you have a captive audience, Rob, so you've already got something in place that, maybe well attended, thinking about those things. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Just real quick, I want to say quickly, Erica, I want to talk about so what the outcomes are. So if your outcomes are, I want to increase skills, as far as your evaluation. So, I would not be like, hey, that's not, good or engaging or, but what are our outcomes? Are your outcomes to increase awareness? Is it, service utilization? Is it behavior change? So, I think one of the things where you balance out is where you want to land as far as your evaluation, your outcomes, and your types of programming. Yeah. Anyone else want to share spaces, successes, barriers, anything else related to prevention? Any questions? I do the 30-second mark and then I count and then I want to thank everyone so much for attending today, regardless of Rob, regardless of when you showed up. It was important for you. We're so glad that you showed up. No worries. Lawan, Bailey, Rob, folks, I just I get really excited about prevention, so I can talk a lot about it. And I had a lot of coffee, so I so appreciate you being here in this space. The semester's over. We're a little worn down. My idea is to really just generate this. We don't have to do things in this like robotic way, and that we can think of prevention differently. But it does excite me. I know that sounds like whack, but it's my jam. But it's been particularly like hopeful meeting with folks and supporting and talking about prevention and really just connecting. I also want to say one thing is saying no is really important too. I know I said it earlier, but it's not all about trying to do as much as you can and getting as many numbers. It's the impact and engagement and behavior changes that we're looking for, and the collaborations are crucial. Carrie, I just want to check in with you if there's anything else you want to say, if there's any last comments or last ideas or thoughts. I think that is it for our panel, unless anyone else wants to just add a last thought or anything.
Well, I
I
just
would,
wanna thank- Go ahead, whoever's, sorry.
sorry. That's okay. I just wanted to add that that this was a good experience, and that I hope that we have an opportunity to have it again. So I'm just putting my plug in there, and that it's very helpful because so oftentimes what I've learned in the 5 years of doing Title IX work from just colleagues is that we all kind of landed in this space from a lot of different paths, and so there's really no blueprint outside of the regulations, of course, the thousands of pages of that, but there's no real path to doing things right on our campuses. And so these types of opportunities are really helpful, and I found it to be very helpful. So I appreciate the ODHE support in helping us to push forward with prevention resources and all the other good things that you all offer. So I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you to all of you who took advantage of this and who gave up your time today to be here and share those experiences with others across the state. And Anne, thank you for your time and continued support and effort to help our campuses, even though you're now one of us working on campus, so to speak. But thank you for all of that. And certainly am always open to providing the resources you all need to implement the practices that will work best for your campus community through this initiative. I did want to also mention, as Erica had shared, and I think she just jumped off, all the sex positivity stuff. A reminder to you all that we do still have the Sexforceation cards from one student that you can use. I ask you not to distribute to them students because I don't have an unlimited supply, but that you can use in your facilitation of workshops and stuff to help talk about sex positivity and help talk about sex and consent and all those things in a way that's easy for students to digest and grab onto as it may match up with your institutional programs and values and whatnot. So if you need those, I do have some more here at the office that I can ship out to you. Just email me and I'd be happy to do that. So anyways, thank you to you all for being here today, and for the three of you for giving up your time and talking about your experiences and for your leadership on this, Anne. So thank you so much. I hope you all get a chance to relax and renew this summer a little bit. At least let it slow down just a little bit, right? Just a little bit. And please let me know what else we can do for you. So take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.